In this episode, we discuss a jarring study from the Cato Institute that asserts that immigrants, both legal and illegal taken together, have paid more than $14 trillion more in taxes than what has been spent on them in the last 30 years. Hello. Welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who's known to be able to speak directly to the hearts of men, Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, you ready to start this off by showing us your ambitions as a writer?
You just totally screwed me up because that's just too much Tupac in one in one entry. Okay. For those listening that know, they know, but there was a lot of Tupac right in there. So sorry. So, All
right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. I'm recording on February 24th, 2026. And Tunde, a couple of days ago, you sent me this post from the Cato Institute, which is a well-known libertarian, right-leaning libertarian think tank that talked about their recently released study about what the impacts of tax revenues from immigrants, and particularly and looking at that in context of what the government has spent on immigrants. And this is legal and illegal. And the numbers are shocking. It's that Cato found that immigrants have paid in 14.5 trillion more. They've paid in more than that, but that's the net number, 14.5 trillion more in taxes than has been spent on them since 1994. And so, Tunde, so you sent this to me, and my eyes are like, oh my gosh, this is a big number. But what stood out to you most in this piece from Cato that suggests that immigrants have been a boon to the U.S. economy and the government budget, and reducing the deficit and so forth by such a large number, and instead of sucking it dry like some people like to suggest?
So what stood out to me was something that's not necessarily directly in the study, but it's a quote from Mark Twain, which is, "There are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics." And that's what I thought. I was like, wow, that when you look at the statistics that the Cato Institute has enlightened us with, that's why I thought about all the lies over the last 30 years about the impact of immigrants on our country. And so that to me just was glaring. And it makes a lot of sense when you read how they broke it down, that the immigrants pay into, they represented, I think over the 30-year period, the total numbers was they represented 14% of government revenue through the taxes they paid, and only 7% of government spending. Yeah. So they were a net positive to the American kind of tax base and the infrastructure of the revenue for the government, and not as much of a burden as we've been told on the spending side. And things that I think I'll use the term frustrated with in recent years in our public dialogue, like people running around saying that illegal immigrants get all these benefits. And I just, I couldn't understand that you got to be American with a Social Security number to apply for benefits and welfare and all that. So, and can someone comment and find a benefit that someone might get, like the Afrikaans who came from South Africa and they got benefits to help them adjust to living in America? Yes, certain things like that do exist. But this idea that en masse, undocumented people, illegal immigrants who may be here on a green card, things like that, are sucking on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid is a lie, and it has been. And those things that are getting sucked on the most are being sucked on by us Americans.
Yeah.
And so,
the logic makes sense also. And again, logic doesn't dictate a lot. And I want to get into that later, but logic doesn't dictate a lot of these discussions. But the logic makes sense too, because it's like, well, the biggest things the government spends money on would be the military, which is non-discretionary spending, by far the biggest number.
Yeah.
And then as far as discretionary spending, so, and then the non-discretionary stuff, meaning like apportion taxes, meaning like I have a Social Security tax on my check and that's supposed to go into the Social Security pot, which is supposed to be paid out, or Medicare. Those are the other big spenders. And the immigrants you're not doing the military spending any more or any less because of the immigrants. And then the entitlement stuff, they're not getting, So those apportion taxes that are again, I pay into a pot, and that pot's supposed to get paid out for those exact functions, Social Security and Medicare. Those aren't going to them either, but if they're on a payroll, they're going to pay payroll tax, and that means they're contributing to those systems. So, the logic makes sense. I mean, I think what really stands out to me is how effective immigrants can be as a scapegoat. Because I'm not a person who's offended by immigration. And we're going to talk about this later. I've always thought that immigration is the kind of thing that you want in a country, especially because the kind of people that would immigrate, that would pick up and leave everything, are the kind of people you want. Those seem like motivated people. Like the people I wouldn't want to immigrate were the people that don't want to get off their couch. But they wouldn't, because they won't get off their couch. So it's like, okay, yeah, this works. So hold up, you want to drop everything and go thousands of miles away to try to work? Cool, come here, that'd be great, So, but setting that part aside, that's my mindset. But I didn't tend to push back on the fact of the matter that immigrants were a cost, or that cost something in the system, or that I wasn't out here saying, oh yeah, we're making way more money because of immigrants than we would be otherwise. But so see these numbers is like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money. 14.5 trillion over 30 years is a huge net benefit. And so to me, it really just digs down into the idea of how effective immigrants can be, and whether that's because of xenophobia, whether there's an issue of it. And I'll say xenophobia because Americans were mad about immigration 100 years ago, 200 years ago, no matter who the immigrants were. When the immigrants were Irish, and they were like it was a big deal. So the Americans have been resistant to immigrants pockets of Americans have been resistant to immigrants for a really long time. I'll say, that said, historically, the U.S. is a nation that built itself into a superpower, in the significant part, on the back of immigration, and a place where politicians like Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, from different camps completely, wax poetic, about how our country is strengthened by immigration, and it's something that makes us better. And so, and generally, say until recent years, until the last year or two, it's been a place that the best and brightest in the world want to come to. So do you think something's changed in America where we have this tenor where so many are so bothered by immigration now, and this hostility we see amongst so many Americans? Again, it's not everybody, but it's a substantial number of people, and it's a high level of hostility. It's not just like, oh, I'd rather not, but it's like, hey, let's do very terrible things to people, and because this is such a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think leadership, let's just call it what it is. I mean, we got a big country. We have a lot of people, different pockets of cultures and subcultures in America, with 300 plus million people. That's not an easy thing to hold together. So we've had leadership in our lifetime, you and I, James, being born in the 1970s, because I know, like you said, we've got a young country, but it's old enough that you've had these different, I'd say, cycles of how leadership has dealt with things. And, there were times, like you said, 100 years ago, American leadership was supportive of xenophobia and bigotry and things like that, and kind of fear messaging. I'd say for us, you and I, growing up post late 70s into the 80s and 90s, we were met with American leadership that generally was about enfranchising people and bringing people together. Obviously, I know we can all sit there and criticize each president over the last 40, 50 years, and pick apart certain things they've said or done to contradict, my statement there. But I think the overall sentiment, they generally, and I think, there's something people can look up. We don't have time to get into it here, but the Southern strategy from 1968, which was a political strategy from the Republican Party, was used to maybe motivate voters during primary time and all that stuff. But generally, people like Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush, generally, when they got in office, had the attitude that we're president of all Americans. And I remember George W. Bush seemed pretty genuine in wanting to get some immigration reform. And he seemed very proud to have the most diverse cabinet at his time, and the first Hispanic attorney general, and Alberto Gonzalez, and other examples like that. So yeah, this has been something that for the early part of you and I's life, American leadership, collectively had a lot of disagreements, but some of the main agreements, like you said, from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, they spoke very similarly and eloquently in a positive way about immigration. And in 2016, for the first time in our lifetime, we got a leader that was very negative and divisive about this topic. And again, he was able to get the following of enough Americans that we've had a change in the last decade in the culture around this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the leadership matters. I don't think it's the people as much. I think it's the sentiment, though. Like right now in the United States, amongst many people, there is a sentiment of none of this is my fault. There's no accountability. And so, yes, like people in that mindset would tend to support maybe a president who's like the leader, like the king of no accountability. Nothing's ever his fault, and nothing bad is ever his fault, and everything good is always his fault, or because of him. So, but it's this idea that, like Truman, you go back that far, it's like, the buck stops here, so to speak. And so there's an ethos of accountability and what's happening, we're going to take responsibility for, we're going to make it better ourselves and so forth, and not just look to blame other people and opportunistically take from people and so forth. And so I think this ethos now, and people can talk about wealth disparity and why these messages may resonate more, but I think there's an ethos now that every problem that we see is somebody else's fault. And in that game, immigration is a great thing is very profitable for people to point at, because that's blame the outsider. Hey, something's wrong. Let's blame the outsider. Oh, this didn't happen. Let's blame the outsider. It's never the fault of the people that are in charge or the people that oversaw everything or the people whose ideas. And I promise you, once efforts that are taking place now make things worse, they're not going to raise their hand and say, hey, yeah, like we were wrong. We thought that this would make it better and it didn't. No, it'll blame somebody else. And so this idea of a lack of accountability, that's the part about the leadership piece that I think has really come through right now. It is that this kind of like sniveling weasel approach, like, oh, who can I blame? Let me blame this person. I need a fall guy, this and that. And it's like, that's just pervasive right now in terms of a messaging that many Americans respond to. And I think that's really the biggest issue, because that's what I said. You could throw all the numbers at people like this that you would want, and it wouldn't change their mind on whether immigration is good. Course. Because the immigration gives them why is this not happening? As far as in like with jobs or with this and that, we can't look around and say, okay, well, maybe regular people don't have any money because the billionaire class has taken up all the money. We can't do that, because then the accountability is on us. Like, that means that we've been doing something wrong in terms of being able to build our society. We've been putting the wrong people in charge. We've been allowing the wrong kind of rules to get put in place, whether it be Citizens United or whatever. That looks at us. But so it's much easier to just say, oh, well, the reason why I don't have any money is because this other poor guy has all, or this other poor guy is the reason I don't have any money.
Well, it's also, remember, I don't have a dog now because a Haitian must have eaten it. And I think that's to me was so symbolic, because you're right. I think of Springfield, Ohio, just before the 2024 election. Think about the stories we heard from the business community there, from the political leadership, like the mayor of the city,
the logical people, and the people talking numbers,
and the people that see the numbers. Exactly. So they said that the city was drowning. The tax base had totally eroded. Why? Not because no one lived there, because of a comment you made earlier. People didn't want to get off the couch. Our fellow Americans in Springfield, Ohio, weren't showing up for work. They were, lack of a better term, it was kind of the opioid stuff, the kind of culture of,
I mean, the reason doesn't matter, man. Right? Like they weren't starting new businesses. They weren't showing up to work in large.
Correct,
this is what the leadership in Springfield was saying to us. Then the Haitians show up and they're showing up to work and they're opening businesses.
Let's break this down. The Haitians didn't just show up. They went to the federal government, the city leaders, and the federal government had a program called TPS, Temporary Protected Status, to bring workers in to begin working. And so then I remember seeing some of the business owners interviewed and said, this is great. These Haitians show up on time. They stay till it's over, blah, blah, blah. They don't complain. They're just happy to have a job.
And remember, because of that community, they started businesses also. So they grew the tax base in a multiple different ways. Yeah.
And so because of things that Americans rightfully so have felt uncomfortable like the rising cost of groceries and the lack of affordable housing and all that, right? That is caused by many factors, right? We know that inflation is caused by printing a lot of money during the CARES Act and the PPP loan period of the COVID thing and the invasion by Russia on Ukraine and the rising cost of energy prices. All these things are ingredients to inflation. We know that there's other factors that come into play in our society with these things, but instead it was easier for the leader at the time to say the Haitians are eating your cats and dogs during a presidential campaign, and it worked. So I think you're right, James. People aren't going to blame the people in power and all that kind of stuff. There's no accountability. We see that in other examples of our culture today, including a big file scandal with the Justice Department. So people see all this, and that to me all affects how people deal internally with our culture, with accountability. And so you're right. I think that as we continue to see this more and more, people will deflect and blame people that don't have an ability to defend themselves, like immigrants. And all these stats be damned. I mean, another stat just to share from the Cato Institute I found fascinating is another way to say that they added $14 trillion from 1994 to 2023 in terms of immigrants to the American bottom line. Another way to flip that number is to say, had we not had immigration since 1994, the federal deficit would be at $48.5 trillion.
Yeah.
So, because that's one of the stats they had there. And I just thought, like, as a guy in economics now, I already think a $37 trillion deficit is too high, but to hear we could have been at 48, it's just interesting. So I think you're right, James. I think the irrationality of the human mind and to be manipulated by people who want to manipulate us will win out. And I don't think that
especially because
people will recognize.
You're taking the impetus that exists among many people to not take responsibility for things and to not be accountable, to for their own actions, as opposed to looking to blame someone else. I mean, we see, like as Black Americans, we see it, where it's a lot of times it's blame the black
that was
guys.
the DEI argument.
Blame the black guys or the black women, whatever. That's why this is happening or that is happening. And there's this, and I'm not even trying to single out and make this a race issue in saying who's the ones that lack accountability. I'm saying that there's a mindset involved here that is looking to blame other people and not looking to, there's no Harry Truman walking through the door talking about the buck stops here and we need to make things better and we need to take our own destiny into our own hand. There's a lot of get rid of this issue or get rid of this person because they're creating the problem. Then get rid of this person because they're creating a problem. Like you said, you threw out the DEI term. It's always something that why these problems are, and it's never, hey, let's try to be better ourselves, so to speak, and then let's make things better one brick at a time, one step at a time. Another context that this so-called quote unquote problem has the U.S. has with immigration is I wanted to mention with the aging of populations and how we've seen reports. Now this has been going on for a while in Japan, but then now we're seeing in many European countries talking about how there's a very substantial amount of concern either that the GDP is going to start trending down or that they're projecting 10, 20, 30 years, GDP dropping 2%, 2%, 3%, up to 4%, because the populations are getting older and there's not a bunch of younger generations coming to carry the load, so to speak, and how that's going to influence these economies. And one of the big recommendations for that, and we'll have all this kind of stuff in the show notes, is that, hey, they said we need more immigration, and they're talking about whether it be for Europe or, Japan or whatever. But they talk about how, and that's difficult practically in a lot of these places because right-wing politicians always use that opportunistically to rile up the population. And so they're in this kind of unsolvable problem thing where they got an aging population. They won't be able to continue to grow the economy, workers, people starting businesses and stuff to keep up with the population aging. And then they can't do the other solution is to have more babies, but that takes 15 years to work, 20 years to work. So it's like, that, and then how are you going to make people have babies? So it's this kind of unsolvable problem. It's presented as an unsolvable problem because we can't do immigration because then the right-wing people are going to fire up everybody about the immigration, which would be the real solution. And then the other thing is just try to tell people to have babies. And that doesn't really work, at least in some reasonable time.
James, they have an answer.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So, no, the Heritage Foundation, remember, it's the trad wife. That's what they're going to do at Lebensborn. Remember, just like the Germans did. We're going to have all these babies. That's how we're going to repopulate. And we're going to kick out 100 million of these brown people, and we're going to just have babies for the next generation and make it up. That's why, James, this is all a fantasy.
The fact that real wages have been going down for a really long time.
I know, but that's why this is all a fantasy. This is like, because I'm glad you mentioned that this isn't about race, because this is a human thing. I wrote down 3 events historically that I just thought of as you're talking. The Holocaust, the Balkans, and Rwanda. All totally different situations, totally different ethnicities and groups of people. But it's an example where a minority group within a larger society was made the scapegoat for things that were already going on and had nothing to do really with that group, being the reason, but it was the pressure valve for the rest of society to point to and say, is their fault, and that's a lot easier than to deal with.
Yeah, who didn't want to take responsibility for it themselves.
Yeah. Or that. So I agree with you. There's that, and or trying to go to the people in power at the moment seems too difficult. So we'll just take it out on this other group. So I think that it's.
Well, a lot of times those kinds of people in power though encourage it because they know that if the people ever wise up and really want to solve the problem, they're going to be the targets. They're going to be people that are coming from.
Divide and conquer. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think with the aging population, all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's the whole, I think that has been the net benefit to the United States, and why one of the reasons, besides, the Constitution and all the good things that we feel are exceptional, I think that immigration is one reason why in the 20th century, the United States just exploded in a positive way from a GDP standpoint.
We didn't have the problem of an aging population because we get a bunch of 20-year-olds keep coming here that are super motivated.
Yeah, like think about since 1965, after the 1965 Civil Rights Act that opened up immigration to more countries than just, the Nordic region. You think about the economic expansion and the economic growth that we've had as a nation. And I know that can be picked apart because it's a long period of time, the last 60 years. But just in general, the bringing in of people, like you said, like I'll be honest, look at my name, Tunde Ogunlana. Both my parents are immigrants. So it's an example where if not for that law, I don't exist because they immigrated here after 1965. And so that's where I feel like, and to your point, James, I got the stories of the old country growing up. I got the stories of how difficult it was. I got the stories of their journey here, which wasn't easy. So number one, I appreciated that from a young age. I also appreciated America. My mom used to always tell me that America is the only country with a constitution, all that. I found that immigrants a lot of times appreciate the United States and what it means more than Americans do, because they have the ability to contrast it from the actual systems they came from, which, unlike a lot of Americans who say things are communist or this and that, they got no idea what communism is.
Yeah. Well,
because my mom grew up in Eastern Europe, and so under Stalin, like she was born in 1944. So what I'm saying is, she used to tell me stories of what it was like to be in a line every Friday to get your rations, your toilet paper and your sugar and all that. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just.
Well, think about it though. Hold up. Of course they appreciate it because they decided to drop everything and come over here. Like, of course they're here by choice. One of the things like interesting, I mean, this is side topic, but one of the things that was notable to me about when I moved to South Florida is how many people in South Florida are here because they want to be here. Not because they were their parents were here, their grandparents were here. Like, it's like, no. There are a lot of people that were here. Unlike I grew up in Cincinnati. And it was like, okay, there was a lot of people there that were there because that's just where their families were. Whereas when I moved down here, it's like, man, there's a lot of people that are here for the sole reason that they looked around at all the options. It was like, I want to be right there. And so, and that was interesting energy to be around, like to be around all these people that just wanted to be here because they thought it was dope. And that's the thing. That's the thing that an immigrant is. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Look at all these countries, This place I have here, I'm not crazy about. Let me go there. And this is an interesting thing about trying to build. This, harkens back to like the Reagan, famous Reagan speech talking about, you can move to Germany, you're not going to be a German and everything, but or move to Japan, not going to be, Japanese. But this is the concept of, and the tension, the underlying tension that's always been there in this country on whether America is a race or an idea, but if you are going to build a nation around not an ethnicity, but concepts like rule of law, around market systems, around freedom of speech, and this Constitution that we have that made the United States an exception when it was created. If you're going to build, then that is kind of an invitation to all the motivated people around the world. Hey, come here. You don't have to, in theory, you don't have to look like this. You don't have to talk like this. You don't have to worship like this. But if you want to grind, if you want to work hard and be able to come up in a place where, and then the leader can't just summarily decide to throw you in prison because he wants to take your house, this is the spot for you. And so you kind of encourage everybody, or that kind of mindset, to come here and work their butt off, And so I always wonder, even when I'm looking back at history and so forth, like if there's a resentment that many Americans have as they become very complacent on the work ethic and the like you said, the appreciation that immigrants have, illegal or legal, again, because illegal is just a matter of what the legal principle is in the place. There were a bunch of illegal immigrants in 1980, and then Ronald Reagan does the amnesty, and in 1990 they're not a bunch of illegal immigrants. So I mean, that's an arbitrary classification. But I wonder if there's a resentment that drives this a lot. Like, these people come in here, they're working harder than me. Like they appreciate this more than me. I think
there is actually,
and so let's just get them out. Because I don't want to have to match their effort. I just want to get them out.
That was why Tulsa was burned down.
Well, yeah, I mean that is right.
It's a resentment. I think that is very real. It's funny, James, that he said, I don't want the leader to come and just take my house. And I was thinking, but the type of but you just got to be ready. See, when the leader comes to take my house, I'll just tell him, hey, dude, I got a $400 million plane for you, and I'll be cool. So you just got to learn how to play the game. That's all. Just grease the wheels, man.
Can I interest you in some meme coin?
Yeah. Hey, man. Hey, man, maybe I'll build a ballroom for you. Hey, I just, I got all kind of stuff I can do, man. Just don't take my house. So,
that's the America that some people are trying to put in place.
You just got to learn how to adapt, dude. That's what it is.
That's the America that
you got to evolve.
Concerned about the immigrants, not the one that's been built up by.
You're too conservative, James. You want the old system. You got to be radical, man. You got to evolve. This is new times, bro.
But no, I mean, it's an issue of our day. And I think this type of information is important to get out there because, again, for the people who are making these decisions, not based on what actually is, but more on their insecurities, their desire to avoid accountability, none of this stuff would matter to them, because, again, the immigration represents something different. But for the people who do like the nation that became a superpower in large part with the help of immigration and with this steady stream of super motivated, educated, or many, at least able-bodied people coming at all times. And now we're looking to try to not just cut that off from a legal standpoint, but actually show people how we're going to be so mean to people like that. It could be something different. I mean, we'll have it in the show notes, but Morgan Stanley's talking like, okay, Europe is looking at a 4% decline in GDP within 14 years. It's like, yo, that's the direction we want to go. Aging population, no reinforcements coming, and then again, the reinforcements that are coming aren't the people that are sitting around. Those are the people that were willing to get up. So it's a decision that thoughtful people are going to have to start participating in, and not just have the people that are led by emotion or fear be the only ones having this conversation, because those James, people are their decision. They are a hammer, and all they see is a nail. And is whether they're afraid of this, they're afraid of that.
Well, remember, the people with emotion, they do welcome immigrants, but only the immigrants that come to this country use the system to enrich themselves with billions of dollars and then pull the bridge up. So people like Rupert Murdoch, who founded Fox, who's been extremely influential over the last 30 years on the politics, and which then makes, ends up being policy decisions, right, that affect these emotional Americans. And then people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk come here. There's been questions about the visas and all that, but then they enrich themselves off the taxpayer through government contracts. And then, once they get enough power, they are part of this, whether it's online and all this dialogue about not wanting other immigrants to come in now and all this kind of this closing of America.
Well, no, it's to pull up the bridge, like you said. They came over the bridge. made it happen, which again, that's the kind of motivated people we want, not necessarily that sentiment, those, like that character of person, but the kind of motivation that we want. Somebody wants to come and work, and then they're like, yeah, let's pull up the bridge now that we got ours. And so that's
after we got all that tax money from the Americans that pay taxes on these government contracts, So anyway.
I mean, it's worthwhile for the people who aren't rabid about something to at some point enter this chat and talk about it, because there are a lot of benefits that could be had. So that's kind of what stood out to me as far as why this conversation was worth.
You get all those people in, I'm gonna just be ready to buy my $400 million plane for my boy. That's it. I'll be good.
All right, man.
I'm only an hour south of Palm Beach, man.
That'll be the I guess we're in glass half full or glass. I don't know if that's half full or glass half empty Tunde today then or not. I don't know what. Like so that,
let's say this. Wait, that's a very good question, James. If I can afford the plane when the time comes, is glass half full?
I don't know, man. So
we'll let time tell.
Well, let's say on that sour note, they've gotten to you, Tunde. They've gotten to you. I just say it ain't so. On that sour note, I think we're gonna close up this podcast. We appreciate you for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think. Send it to a friend. Till next time, I'm James Keys.
And apparently I'm compromised. So we'll see how the next show goes.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Later.